A developer dropped a 4-acre crystal-clear lagoon, lifeguards, swim-up bar, the works, into what was a cow pasture roughly 6 weeks before it opened. A city platted on paper in 1957 now holds more miles of navigable canals than anywhere else on Earth, and for decades the waste from the homes on those canals was quietly leaching straight back into the water. The horse capital of the world is watching Amazon-scale warehouses rise across the road from the largest equestrian center in the country, one pasture at a time. These are 12 Florida towns being transformed beyond recognition almost overnight, ranked by how explosive the change is and how hard each place is straining under it. One of these towns is the first in America built entirely on solar power, founded by a former NFL lineman, survived a major hurricane without losing a single light, and it still made this list. And one town near the top of this countdown was purpose-built for retirees over 55 and just posted the largest jump in young children of anywhere in the entire country. That one I had to read twice. This channel covers the Florida that the listing photos skip, the costs behind the canals, the schools behind the lagoons, the pipes under the waterfront wonderland. If that is the version you want, subscribe now. We go through it every week. Here are 12 towns growing faster than they can handle. Number 12, Groveland. Most people drive straight past Groveland on their way somewhere else in Lake County, and for most of its history, that was fine. The town started in 1895 as a turpentine camp, then settled into a long, quiet century of citrus groves and cattle. It was one of those places that existed on a Florida map mostly as a dot between more interesting dots. That version of Groveland is over. Since 2020 alone, the population has jumped more than 40%. Over the past decade, roughly doubled. Orlando's commuter sprawl reached the county line and kept coming, and subdivision after subdivision is now filling in toward the visible tree line at the western edge of town. That tree line matters more than it looks. Groveland sits against the green swamp, not a marketing name, a state-designated area of critical concern. And the green swamp is what recharges the aquifer supplying much of Central Florida's drinking water. The rooftops are heading straight for it. Picture this. You moved here for the affordable lot, the breathing room, the distance from the city. You got it for a while. Now the rooftops marching toward the swamp behind your neighborhood are marching toward the same water your tap pulls from every morning. The growth that followed you here did not stop at your street. Groveland has no particular defenses against what's coming, no geography that says stop here, no policy wall that is held so far. A century of quiet citrus country, and Orlando found it anyway. Number 11, Parrish. Parrish is where you go when Sarasota and St. Pete have finished pricing you out. It sits in Manatee County, north of the river, an old agricultural and railroad hamlet that has become the fastest-growing frontier of one of Florida's fastest-growing counties. The buyers landing here are not choosing Parrish so much as they are retreating to it, pushed east of the interstate by prices they could not clear anywhere closer to the coast. And what they find when they arrive is, depending on the day, either impressive or disorienting. The development company behind one of the flagship communities planted a 4-acre, crystal-clear lagoon in what was recently cow pasture. Lifeguards on deck, swim-up bar, the full resort package, and called it Sayre. I keep coming back to that image because it captures the whole dynamic so cleanly. The amenity arrived before everything else did. The lagoon is there. The schools are somewhere else in a long line. Manatee County has added thousands of students in a matter of a few years, with more than a dozen schools at or over capacity. The main roads back up in ways the county has not yet budgeted a real fix for. Imagine getting your kids to the bus stop and watching them ride to a building that was already overcrowded before your neighborhood broke ground on a road that nobody widened to account for your subdivision. The resort is open. The infrastructure is still catching up. They built the lagoon first. The schools are still catching up. Number 10, Nocatee. In 2010, Nocatee barely registered, about 4,500 people, near Jacksonville in St. Johns County, inside 14,000 acres of former pine flatwoods and wetland. By 2020, nearly 400% growth, over 22,000 residents. And Nocatee had become one of the best-selling master-planned communities in the entire country. The developer did not just build houses, he had to build a parkway, reserve land for 9 schools, set aside 2/3 of the acreage as preserved forest and wetland, which was simultaneously the right environmental call and the most effective sales tool the project had, because every buyer could look out their window and see something that looked like old Florida still standing, the very thing the development was replacing. That contrast is the whole story of Nocatee, and I think the people who bought in understood it and accepted the trade. What they may not have fully priced in is what happens when the last empty parcels disappear. Nocatee is now 96% sold out. The community that drove St. Johns County's growth surge is essentially full, which means the boom does not stop. It just moves past the boundary onto the next stretch of undeveloped land, the raw pine flats beyond the preserve lines, the parcels Nocatee's marketing always kept just off frame. The most successful instant suburb in Florida just ran out of room. Number 9, Horizon West. Horizon West should not exist. The citrus groves that covered this stretch of Orange County, just west of Disney, were killed in the great freezes of the 1980s, and for years the land sat stripped and useless. Dead tree stumps in the flat, former orchard ground, no obvious future. In 1995, planners redrew the whole parcel as a cluster of new urbanist villages with walkable cores and connected street grids, the kind of thing you do not often see in Florida's sprawl by default planning tradition. It was, on paper, a thoughtful idea. The market decided it was an irresistible one. Horizon West has gone from around 58,000 people in 2020 to roughly 75,000 just a few years later, one of the fastest growing planned communities in the nation. And the design's ambitions have run headlong into the math of that growth. One elementary school in the area was built for 725 students. It is holding over 1,000. That is not a rounding error. That is a building operating 40% above its designed capacity, with the next wave of rooftops still under construction. What does that mean for you? It means your child's school district is drawing attendance boundaries before the ink on the zoning map is dry. New schools here tend to open already over capacity, because the families arrive faster than the bond money and the construction schedules can follow. The ghost of an orange grove is still visible along the edges of some subdivision walls, the old stumps poking through the grass where the citrus rows used to run, conjured out of dead orange trees and growing faster than anyone can teach. Number 8, Babcock Ranch. Babcock Ranch is the one on this list that asks you to believe the future of Florida development is already here in Charlotte County, nearly an hour from the Gulf beaches. It was built from scratch on a historic cattle ranch by a founder who was a former NFL lineman, designed from the ground up as America's first solar-powered town. 870 acres of panels, enough to run the whole community. The test came in 2022 when Hurricane Ian made landfall and darkened the region. Babcock Ranch kept the lights on, not just a little, fully on, while surrounding towns sat in the dark for days. The national press showed up, the way they do when something actually works, and Babcock became the story of the storm that was not a catastrophe. It is now one of the fastest-selling master-planned communities in the country. I will be honest, that track record is genuinely impressive, and it deserves to be said plainly on a channel that mostly explains what went wrong. But the full picture matters. Babcock Ranch is still small, genuinely tiny relative to what the developer's build-out plan eventually describes. Full completion is not projected until the 2050s. The community is, for now, entirely developer-controlled, with the rhythms and trade-offs that come with that. And the coast is a long drive away. If you want the Gulf on a Tuesday afternoon, you are looking at close to an hour each way. The mission is real. The storm-proofing works. America's first solar town survived Ian without losing a light. Just don't be in a hurry. Still ahead, a city sold in mail-order lots that now has more canals than anywhere on Earth, and has been quietly presenting its residents with the bill for everything the original boom left out. Number 7, Lakewood Ranch. Lakewood Ranch is what happens when a planned community works so well that success becomes its own problem. Spread across the Manatee-Sarasota county line on what was a cattle ranch, it has grown into a 50-square-mile edge city with multiple downtowns, more than 70,000 residents, and a ranking that trails only the villages nationally in annual home sales, year after year. The infrastructure pitch was always that Lakewood Ranch was the suburb done right. Thoughtful planning, mixed uses, the whole promise. And by the standards of Florida sprawl, a lot of that promise held. The catch is what success did to the price. The average home there now runs over $700,000. The roads that connect the ranch to the wider region cannot keep pace with what 70,000 plus residents generate. The state is widening highways and rebuilding interstate interchanges specifically to handle the traffic load. Picture this. You paid a premium to live in the suburb that got it right, and now the road outside your neighborhood is a permanent construction zone. The house next door sold for more than your kids will ever qualify for, And the thing that made Lakewood Ranch desirable has slowly priced out the people who would have been your neighbors a decade ago. Build something this successful and it stops being accessible. The boom's greatest success story is also its clearest warning. Number 6, Northport. Northport is one of Florida's biggest cities by area. Say that to someone who has never been there and they picture a real city. Density, skyline, maybe a downtown with a coffee shop that fills up on Saturday mornings. What you actually find is a city that is enormous on a map and still catching up to that size on the ground. It was built on cow pasture and scrub, part of the same old speculative lot sale tradition that shaped a lot of Southwest Florida, and it has exploded, up nearly 19% in just 3 years, more than 50% since 2010. The flatness that made the land cheap to plat is also the flatness that gives water nowhere to go. Hurricane Ian arrived in 2022 and dropped 22 inches of rain on a city with no elevation to speak of, streets going to standing water, no obvious route for the flood to drain. 7 people were killed. After Ian, city officials stood up and said, plainly, that they had kicked the can of infrastructure down the road for far too long. That is not a critic's line. That is what the city's own leadership said out loud. What it means in practice for the people who live there is that the affordability and the flood risk are not separate features. They are the same feature. The flat, low, cheap land that made a Northport lot accessible to buyers who couldn't afford Sarasota is the same land that turned streets into canals when the storm arrived. Kicked the can down the road for far too long. Their words. Number 5, Palm Coast. Palm Coast is a city built backwards, and I mean that almost literally. In 1969, a developer named ITT platted roughly 42,000 home sites across a big stretch of pine-covered swamp in what is now Flagler County, the largest planned development in Florida history at the time. They laid 500 miles of roads. They put in water and sewer lines. They did all of this before more than a handful of people actually lived there. For 50 years, the city existed mostly on paper, a grid of named streets running through scrub, waiting. Now it is finally filling in, past 100,000 people, up more than 200% since 2000. The built first, populated later logic is finally meeting its moment. The catch is what 50 years does to infrastructure. The pipes under those streets were installed 2 generations before the people who are now using them arrived. The roads were graded for a projected 250,000 residents that only now, slowly, is approaching reality. The state has issued Palm Coast an order to expand its sewer capacity because the system built during the Nixon administration was not designed for the population it is receiving in the 2020s. The bones of the city are good, wide streets, logical layout, but they are old bones. Built the roads first, waited 50 years for the neighbors, and now the pipes need replacing. Still coming. The city with more canals than anywhere on Earth that forgot to connect them to sewers. And the fastest growing metro in the entire country, where horse farms are becoming warehouses one fence line at a time. Number 4, Cape Coral. Someone sat down in 1957, looked at a mangrove swamp on the southwest coast of Florida, and decided to dredge it into a city. Not a neighborhood, a city. The pitch was a waterfront wonderland, and they sold it in mail-order lots to buyers across the country, sometimes to people who had never set foot in Florida. And it worked. It worked far beyond what anyone projected. Cape Coral now has more than 400 miles of navigable canals, more than any city on Earth. More than 200,000 residents, up about 40%. People bought canal-front homes, pulled their boats out of the backyard, lived the Florida life the brochure described. What the brochure left out is what the original development also left out: sewers. For decades, the homes on those canals sat on septic tanks, no central sewer connection, and the waste from those septic systems was leaching back into the canals that the whole community was built around. The waterfront wonderland was quietly contaminating its own selling point. The city knows this. The response is a 9-figure borrowing program to run water and sewer lines to thousands of parcels, block by block, a project that is now a feature of daily life in Cape Coral neighborhoods. Sewer construction equipment staged in residential streets across the city. What does that mean for you if you bought on the canal? You are receiving a bill. Part of a project costing hundreds of millions of dollars in city borrowing, passed along to residents to fix the infrastructure the original boom chose not to build. The city has also banned irrigation from a depleted aquifer. 400 miles of canals, and they forgot the sewers. Number 3, Port St. Lucie. The numbers around Port St. Lucie require a moment to absorb. In 1958, a development company platted 80,000 lots across the pine flatwoods and cattle land on the Treasure Coast, selling them for $10 down and $10 a month. $10. That grid sat largely empty for 6 decades, growing slowly, the lots filling in at the pace that $10 land attracts. Then something shifted. 5 straight years, Port St. Lucie has ranked as the single fastest growing large city in the United States. Not Florida, the country. It added over 9,000 residents in a single recent year. It is now Florida's 3rd largest city by area, past 250,000 people, up nearly 30% in 5 years. I keep coming back to the arithmetic of that. A city platted in 1958 for buyers paying pocket change is now posting median home prices around $400,000. The road outside your neighborhood, whichever road that is under construction because the city is perpetually widening corridors to catch up with a population that the 1950s grid was never designed to absorb at this speed. The catch is not that Port St. Lucie grew. It was drawn to grow. The whole point of that original plat was eventual density. The catch is the speed at which the demand arrived, the prices climbed, and the roads fell behind. Sold for $10 down. Now the median is $400,000. The roads are still catching up. Number 2, Wildwood. Wildwood sits at the edge of the Villages in Sumter County, which means it sits at the edge of a machine. The Villages is the largest retirement community on Earth, designed for residents over 55, golf carts on dedicated roads, amenities tuned specifically to a demographic that has already done the commute and school district phase of life. For decades, Wildwood was the rural crossroads county that happened to be next door to that machine. Cattle pasture, citrus, a quiet county seat. Then the Villages kept expanding, and Wildwood became what expansion produces, the fastest growing metro area in the entire United States by U.S. census count. Wildwood's own population has roughly doubled since 2020 alone. And here is the twist that I genuinely did not see coming when I first read through these numbers. Wildwood recently posted the largest jump in young children of anywhere in the country. Young children. In the metro area built for retirees over 55. What happened is what always happens when a large, wealthy community generates jobs. Service workers, construction crews, delivery drivers, healthcare staff, and those workers need somewhere affordable to live. They landed in Wildwood and they brought their families. The city had to build a $150 million wastewater plant to handle the growth. Analysts are already warning of regional water shortages as the boom rolls into adjacent counties. The retirement community's infrastructure was never engineered for this. Built for people over 55, now home to the fastest growing population of young children in the country. Make that make sense. Number 1, Ocala. Ocala deserves the heaviest treatment on this list, and not just because the census handed it the top ranking. It deserves it because it is the town where the entire argument of this countdown lands with the most force. For a century, Ocala's identity was specific and visible. White-fenced thoroughbred farms spreading across green rolling pasture in the north-central Florida hills, the horse capital of the world, not as a slogan but as a lived reality. Hundreds of horse farms. The World Equestrian Center, the largest equestrian facility in the country, sitting at the center of all of it. Marion County's land costs a fraction of Tampa or Orlando, and the landscape that kept prices low is the same landscape that gave the horse operations room to exist. That combination, cheap land, open country, established equestrian infrastructure, is what built Ocala's identity across a century. It is now, by the U.S. Census, the single fastest growing metropolitan area in the entire United States, 2 years running. Nearly 430,000 people in the metro, up more than 17% since 2020. The I-75 corridor through Marion County carries 58,000 vehicles a day and something close to 70% of all truck traffic in the state of Florida. That corridor is where the collision is happening in real time. The cheap land that made horse farms viable is the same cheap land that makes enormous distribution warehouses economically irresistible to developers. Stand at the World Equestrian Center and look across the road. An Amazon-scale warehouse is rising on the other side. That is not a metaphor or a projected fear. That is the present tense view. The white fences are coming down one farm at a time along that interstate, replaced by warehouse rooflines and subdivision walls on a highway already running at truck corridor capacity before the next round of development breaks ground. From your front porch, if you moved here for the horse country and the green space, you can watch the identity of the place being removed in pieces at a pace that is measurable year over year. The fastest growing place in America is growing away from the only thing that made it famous. And that is what this whole list is really about. Florida does not just grow. It grows faster than it can remember what it was, and the places paying the highest price are the ones that had the most to lose. If you live in one of these towns, or left one, tell us in the comments, what is the one thing that disappeared that you wish you could get back? And if any of this made you wonder where in Florida things have actually stayed affordable without the chaos, that list might surprise you even more. If this kind of honest look at what is actually happening on the ground in Florida is useful to you, give this video a like and subscribe. We do this every week, and the next one goes somewhere you might not expect.